dear friends, today I want to welcome Alexander Pappas. He is a spiritual seeker and he is 90 years now. I really admire the way he is hale and healthy. He recently had his Gemini birthday, and belated birthday wishes, Alexander Pappas.
Thank you.
In Chennai, India, we had a transaction analysis conference a few years back. And Alexander Pappas has accompanied his wife, Professor Kuzun. And during the break, we had a chance to have an interaction. And during the interaction, Alexander Pappas was sharing about his dualistic and non-dualistic perspective ideas and about the book he's writing, The Heaven and Nirvana, such a huge book. Then later I ordered this book. I read, it was 800 pages. I couldn't finish the full, but how much ever I read, it was so inspiring, and that led to inviting him for this dialogue now, so that we can hear from him what he wants to communicate to us through this book, Heaven and Nirvana. A little more background about Alexander Pappas. From now, I will be quoting his name as Alex for easy contact with him. He is an MBA from University of California, Berkeley. He finished in 1953. However, his influence towards the Vedanta of India and Zen Japan influenced a lot. And so instead of the business world, he dedicated a lot of time in teaching psychology and comparative religion in the Peralta Community College in San Francisco Bay Area. He has widely traveled, lectured in many places through the world. Interestingly, he has visited India 15 times and to other places and given a lot of lectures. And I welcome Alex, and we would know more about him as we dialogue, and I will be interviewing him with questions. We are going to focus on the theme, being in the world, but not out of the world. What does it mean? We will hear from him more. So Alex, a question to you. Please share what inspired you to become a comparative religious teacher.
I have to go way back to spring of 1954. I was 22 years old, and I had finished my MBA, and I got my first job with the New England Mutual life insurance company. And that's a story how that came about. But during the course of my seeking customers, I met a fellow named Ted Chenoweth, and I didn't know anything, didn't realize this, but I attended the University of California at Berkeley, but I lived in San Francisco with my parents. I was a commute student. It was the most economical way to do that. So I didn't realize it, but there was a Vedanta temple in Berkeley next to the famous People's Park, which you may have heard about, the riots in Berkeley in the 60s. And I didn't know about it. But anyway, I met Ted. He didn't buy any insurance, but he gave me a great gift. He mentioned to me that on every Sunday evening, he went to the Vedanta temple to hear the Swami give a lecture on Vedanta. And I said, "What's Vedanta? You mean there's a temple in Berkeley?" And he explained it to me. So I decided to go to the temple. I always had an interest in philosophy and spiritual matters, but I never studied it formally in school. And anyway, I went and heard my first lecture on Vedanta. And I loved it. I was so inspired by the Swami. And then hearing about the infinite unchanging, and I went outside and I started thinking about it. Then I realized I didn't have a clue about what he was talking about. It was so different from me. Uh, I didn't realize it, but it was pure non-duality. And Advaita, Advaita, Vedanta, the three schools of Vedanta. This is the non-dual of Shankaracharya. And but I intuitively felt I heard something of great value. I was too young to think about becoming a renunciate at age 22, but that's how I encountered Vedanta. I'm so now to get to your question, how do I intended to have a business career and wear a gray suit and stay in business, but so that Vedanta seed was planted in me. Then in the course, I had technical training in insurance, and in 1956, the telephone rang. And the telephone rang, and the head of the local association asked me to teach a technical course in insurance at the local Merit College, which is one of the Peralta colleges. He says, it's every Tuesday afternoon, and you're the only person in our group that's had formal education in these technical aspects. Would you teach it? I said, okay, I'll do that. Well, that gave me a foothold. It was a very interesting experience because when I went into the room, there were about 50 people there, and they all had been in business for at least a year. And when I entered the room, they all stopped talking. And I said, oh, what's going on? Then I realized I was the youngest person in the room. Well, I soon won them over. And the course was a success. And I did that every Tuesday afternoon for 2 years. And that made a relationship between me and Peralta. And some other courses came up. The phone rang again in 1961, and they wanted me to come on board full time. And that's how I got into teaching. So going into business, meeting Ted, then getting the job, all fell together. I didn't solicit anything. It all just came naturally. That's what was so interesting. People usually fight for jobs to get a teaching job in the Bay Area where many people like to live. I didn't do any chasing. The phone rang, people called me up. So I realized later in life, this was the divine will as far as I was concerned.
Thank you. Because in the initial few pages of your book, you have mentioned about the phone rang again.
By the time the early 1970s arrived, I already completed 20 years in business or teaching business, and I was really ready for a change. And then the phone rang, and the head of the social science department and Tom Trent invited me to lunch. I was suspicious. I thought they wanted to put me on some kind of committee. And then I was shocked when they said, we will like you to start teaching interpersonal relations group therapy because you're the, and I said, well, I never had a course in psychology. And then they looked at me and said, you had 10 years of serious group therapy and personal work. I said, okay, I'll do it. I'll make a life change. I'm ready. But the school's got to help finance me to get my bachelor's and master's degree in psychology simultaneously. So all of a sudden, I was a psychology teacher, and I went back to school and got my bachelor's and master's degrees in psychology 20 years after I had gotten my MBA, a true Gemini. And then after a few years, another colleague called me, and Marlis, and she was the world religions teacher. And she says, I'm retiring early, and you're the only person that knows anything about Eastern thought, and et cetera, and I'm going to recommend that you take over the religions course. I said, thank you very much. I'd love to do that. So the phone rang again. I never did anything. The phone kept ringing to teach, to go teach business, then to teach psychology, then to teach religion. It was amazing. And then after I'm teaching religion, the phone starts ringing and I get invited to speak at different places, pro bono all the time. I never charge. And that's the story. I also, during this time, became a member of the Theosophical Society and a Buddhist group. I love spiritual organizations that have good intent, and so it opened me up. And then in 1970, jumping around here a bit, instead of I got something in the mail, not the phone ringing, from the University of California to come and fly with the boys in the band. And that sounds strange, but 1970, they had the great exposition in Kyoto, Japan. And the University of California marching band was invited to participate. And they hired a plane to fly the boys in the band to Japan. But they had extra seats and they were trying to sell them to alumni in order to help finance them. So I thought, I'll go to Japan this summer instead of Greece, where my parents had been born, my roots. And so, but this was very much to do with my spiritual path, because in Japan, while I toured around for 1 month, I met my friend Bernard, and a French fellow who spent 5 years on the road. And we became friends. And I said, well, when you travel through California, come and stay with me at my house. He said, fine. We became friends. Well, in due course, but then Bernard left. And then in 1979, the phone rang. It's Bernard. He says, Alix. He had a very strong French accent. Alix. Yes, Bernard, I know it's you. How could I not know it's you? He says, I am at the New Delhi airport with my guru, Swami Prem Varni from Rishikesh. And he's arriving tomorrow at San Francisco International Airport. Pick him up. I said, thank you for all the notice. So the next day I'm on my way to the airport to pick up the Swami. What am I going to do with the Swami? In effect, my house became an ashram for 8 or 9 months.
Okay.
And his disciples and friends in America were coming to the house. So I reserved my own bedroom and bath, and I surrendered the house. And it was a wonderful thing. Every morning we would get up, we would meditate, we would do hatha yoga, they would cook vegetarian cooking, and it was a wonderful experience. There were some bumps, egos involved, people coming, but that's all part of the learning. And I never became a disciple of Swami Premrani, but a devotee and a good friend. And so that inspired me to start making trips to India. And of course, this all kindled my memories of going to Vedanta in 1954. So starting in 79 on, I became very active in the Vedanta Society in Berkeley and going to India many times. I could go on and on and on, but you get the idea. So it was my destiny. I ran into Bernard, and then Bernard calls me from the airport. And that's the story.
Yeah. Because again, the phone rang. You have mentioned it many times in the book, and I could see how this invitation was happening. And you have mentioned about it as a karmic invitation. So can you explain a little about what you mean by the karmic part of it?
Oh, yes. Well, the word karma, we have to be careful. In the Indian Vedantic tradition, karma is the law of cause and effect. Often in Buddhism, karma means the action, not the effect. But this is little kind of technical stuff, how many angels dance on the head of a needle kind of thing. But basically, it's the law of cause and effect. And you might say, well, does that mean that and basically, we all believe in karma within this lifetime. As physical karma, if I overeat, I'm going to gain weight. And if I treat people badly, I'm going to have bad relations with others. So no, we all believe in karma, that physical. Karma becomes controversial when the effect is sometimes taught that will happen in a future lifetime. That means believing in reincarnation. When you
Mm,
tie karma together with reincarnation, then some people say that's baloney, and other people say, oh, it makes great sense.
mm,
If that makes sense.
yes.
So we do accept karma. The controversy is, when does the effect occur? Does it occur this lifetime or the last lifetime? And I have an elaborate discussion of karma in my book. There's the karma. Are we suffering or enjoying? And karma is not necessarily negative. A lot of people
Mm,
think that there can
mm,
be very positive karma.
mm,
And so are we experiencing this lifetime the karma of our past lives, and what we're doing now will affect future? And it is not fatalistic. I believe we can change our consciousness uh, during this lifetime and affect what we experience in future lifetimes. If you believe that, what we do, that we have the will, the ability to do positive things, so that in future lifetimes we will be making progress psychologically and spiritually. And we're not doomed, so to speak, to our past actions. We can rectify them to some extent through spiritual and psychological work.
mm, yeah.
Oh, by the way, is a very important point. This gets a little tricky, so I'm going to ask you and the viewers a little indulgence. The best work you can do in a lifetime is to create no karma. Because, and how can you, that possible? Like, that means no action. Well, if you study the yogic traditions, yoga is much more than exercise. There's the path of karma yoga, where you perform actions without being attached to the success or failure of the outcomes, and you don't need to be appreciated. There's no you, there's no individual lower self. You are goodness, you are a positive force. And so if you, and because the teaching of the non-dual traditions in general is that by not producing any karma, you will eventually release your consciousness after death to merge with the absolute and
Mm,
escape the the cycle of birth, rebirth, etc. Because every lifetime we have our joys, but we also have a lot of suffering. And so the end of suffering is achieved by living a life that does not produce karmic effects that bind us. Like, and ironically, if you get attached to doing good works, that can cause you to be reborn in a more, to be a positive thing. So how to do good works without attachment to succeeding and being appreciated? This is a great challenge in the path of karma yoga. And for me personally, I try to do that. And there are other paths in yoga, which and you take the one that suits your personality. I'm an active person, so and I'm also like to use my mind. And there's another path called Yana Yoga, which I'm drawn to. And as I've aged, I realize I've also have a bit of devotion in me, and they call it the path of Bhakti Yoga.
mm,
And then there's the path of Raja Yoga and meditation, based on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, as modified by Swami Vivekananda, and that became called Raja Yoga. That's a huge subject. I cover these in my book. Uh, there's a chapter called Vedanta and Yoga Philosophy. And I hope I'm being clear. It's kind of,
yeah, thank you for sharing about the karmic principles and how that has been influenced in your life by the phone ringing again and again. Thank you.
yes, you're welcome. Oh, by the way, it helps in decision making. I think sometimes we struggle with how to decide something. Well, then just do a little fantasy. Well, if karma is real and if reincarnation is real, what's the outcome of my decision going A or taking B? That might help make the decision.
Hmm. Okay, so it can be applied to the day-to-day life also.
Absolutely. All of these things have to have value in that sense, because I personally believe the purpose of our life is to elevate our consciousness. And I believe in the evolution of consciousness. Charles Darwin did a wonderful job about the body, but I also believe this is just a personal statement and the evolution of consciousness. I just think how differently I see the world at age 90 than I did when I was 18. I was well intentioned, but I was so unaware.
Thank you, Alex, for this. In your book, you have often used the expression being in the world, but not of the world. What does this mean?
Okay. To be in the world, or I could say to be successfully in the world, as successfully means surviving, not getting rich. To be in the world is to understand the social norms of your culture and to survive. If you need food, you get a job, make some money, and buy it. You don't steal it. And you look. So being in the world, but the underlying idea is that being in the world, you're accepting this as the ultimate reality. That the material world is the reality. Period. Uh, So that's where the of, say, being in the world is knowing how to survive in a practical level. And being of the world is accepting it as the reality, the only reality. Okay, am I clear on that? Now, spiritual growth makes us in the world, but not of it. So we still have to be practical. In fact, Sigmund Freud pointed out that the development of the ego, the low ego, is very important because you learn how to survive in your culture. Uh, and often in spiritual circles, they talk about you got to kill the ego. I don't believe that. You got to kill egocentricity,
Mm,
egocentricity, where you think you're better than other people and the rules don't apply to you. So I think this is a very important thing. Beware of those statements about killing the ego. A healthy
mm,
ego helps you be in the world in a positive way, and you don't go to jail.
mm,
Now, being in the world but not of it means not of it. You accept the fact there's a dimension beyond this world. See, the world we live in is a relative world. It is known. There's multiplicity. There's me. There's Geethan. There's India. There's Berkeley, etc. There's business. There's psychology. Multiplicity, and the key thing of everything in this relative world, because relative means there's relationships, like I'm having one right now with you. But the key thing to understand, which the Buddha taught very beautifully, is everything of this world is impermanent and
mm,
constantly changing. And
mm,
if we grasp and get attached to something that's always changing, we're going to suffer pain.
mm, mm,
It's okay to love and want and desire, but just don't be attached to your lollipops.
mm, mm,
It's very important. And so being not of the world means you're really accepting the fact there's something which I like to call the absolute.
mm,
Or some people call it the divine, some people call it God,
mm,
whatever the label is, there's this great mystery
mm,
that we intuitively have a sense and are drawn to. And I think it's very important. I like to use the word mystery. Uh, I've never heard a preacher or a minister or an imam or a Vedanta teacher try to define uh, the great mystery. All we can say is what it is not.
mm,
It's called negative theology, but not in a bad sense.
Mhm.
We can only speak of this great mystery in terms of what it is not. It is not a big bank account. Okay. Now, in the dualistic point of view, you can use a positive. Oh, by the way, this negative view, the technical term for that is apothetic. Now, in non-duality, spiritual traditions, like the Abrahamic traditions of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, for example, they're cataphatic, which means that you can give attributes. You hear people speak, God is powerful, God is love, God is this, God is that, but they never tell you what is it that has this power and this love, and is there even an it? This gets really tricky. But the spiritual dimensions and in the dualistic point of view, you can give attributes. And in my book, I apologize to my readers saying, you have to let me cheat a little bit because I have to use a dualistic language in order to talk to you about non-dualism.
Yeah.
So the language of non-dualism is silence, but I like to talk, and I'm enjoying this very much, being with you this morning.
Thank you. So what I understand is being in the world is the ability to engage with the world.
Right.
And being off of it is not holding to what I'm engaging, but I'm allowing to engage in the flow, and so that I'm in sync with the life. If I hold, then it's suffering, because the impermanence we are holding and trying to make it permanent, and that's against the life. So it's fighting.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
And not of it means you recognize another dimension.
Yeah, okay. There is another dimension.
That's very important to add to what you said. I agree with, but just add that one more
Yeah,
thing.
one more thing.
Because not of it is really, it's a positive statement. When you say I'm not of just the world, you're saying I have this feeling about something else.
Can you explain the title, Heaven and Nirvana?
Oh yeah. Heaven, well, I like to make a general statement. In talking about religion and spirituality, we basically have to speak in metaphors, because we're really dealing with a great mystery, which we're trying to understand with our cognitive minds. Heaven is a symbol of duality. For example, and Nirvana is a symbol of non-duality. And this is the subtitle of the book, Duality and Non-Duality in the World's Religions. So what do I mean by that? Let me just say that let's talk about the Abrahamic religion in Islam. What are the basic beliefs? There is one God who created the universe, that we have an immortal soul. There's a God, there's creation, and we have an immortal soul. We have one life, and when we die, we are judged. We either go to heaven or the other bad place. But when let's say we're good and we make it to heaven, there's an individual immortal soul, still separate from the divine. Think about that. When you speak about an immortal soul, you're talking about multiplicity. You are not merged with God or the divine or whatever these words. Okay. Now, Nirvana, we can only say what is not when we talk about non-duality. See, the dualistic reality we call the relative reality. Now we're going to talk about the made-up word, absolute reality. I'm at a loss. I'm cheating already, but I have no choice. We have the absolute reality, and it's unknown. We only can say what it is not. The formal definition of non-duality is not two. It is Advaita Vedanta, for example, or the other traditions I'll mention later. It's not two. It's much more, but it's in order to communicate easily with the world. I can say it's oneness. or unity. But I know I'm cheating because oneness implies there's a two-ness. But let me cheat a little bit so I can communicate. And the one thing, and the most important postulate, it again saying what it is not changing. And let me cheat a little more. We can say it's immutable, permanent. So maybe a definition of God is that which does not change. They really meditate on that. The definition of the great mystery is that which does not change, or that which we do not know. And this also raises the whole issue of territory. What do I mean by that? Science has its territory. Philosophy has its territory. Religion has its territory. And they're all very appropriate and needed. And science does a wonderful job, and I'm so glad it does. I'm so glad I can get good medical and dental treatment and try to understand all the comforts that they help us with. But science, even if we accept the Big Bang theory, the singularity as the cause of the universe, we still don't have a final answer because the scientists say we don't know where these things came from that came together that formed the singularity. Who lit the match? I'm not criticizing them. They're struggling very hard to understand. But there's no ultimate answer in science with these questions, the basic questions of, now I jump to philosophy. Where do we come from? Why are we here? And where are we going? And so the mind tries, and of course they disagree. And by the way, at this point, my book got so long. If there's ever a second edition, I would add another chapter about Western philosophy's non-dualists. There's a rich treasure there. And then, of course, religion takes on, through belief, primarily, answers to these questions. And I think we all have to make the choice. What is the purpose of our life? Well, of course, we have to survive and make sure we have a place to sleep and clothes to wear. But to understand that perhaps we also will find a more fulfilling life in service to others, and to try to experience and develop a higher consciousness and approach this great mystery. I think it's a wonderful journey. And even if we don't make it, it's such a rewarding place to be. I think it makes us all better human beings.
Yeah, certainly, I think so. Metaphorically, for me to share my understanding of your title, Heaven and Nirvana. So the heaven is like the drop of a water, and the ocean are still separate, but they are not merged together. When it comes to the Nirvana part, the drop is part of the ocean now. I think it's one of the Rumi's sentence.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you for giving a picture and meaning of this title, because when people read the book, if they understand the meaning, I think it's very, very helpful. Thank you, Alex, for that.
The original title of this book was going to be The Mountain and the Lake, and I have a picture of that. And there's a very short statement here I like to read. The mountain is the mystery. That's okay. Okay. The lake is the mind.
Okay.
The wind is our thoughts.
Wow.
The gentler the wind, the better reflection of who we really are.
It answers, yeah.
And then I have a whole paragraph explaining that, but you got it.
Thank you. It also leads for the audience to reach out.
That's why I have a picture of the mountain and the lake on the cover of the book.
Thanks for sharing the significance of this mountain and lake. Yeah. Thank you for that. Why did you write Heaven and Nirvana? What inspired you towards integrating various religious studies.
Okay. Yes. This what's first. There's the first part would be the heading would be academic. I used to complain to my wife that the current world religions books are imbalanced. That 90% of the material only deals with the mainstream dualistic aspects of the most traditions, and hardly any attention is paid to the non-dual. For example, if you take a chapter on Judaism or Christianity, for example, they'll describe the traditions in great detail. Let's take Judaism, mainstream Judaism, and you'll learn about the historical roots of Judaism and its belief in one God and the great experience at Mount Sinai, and etc. And then in that 40-page chapter describing that, there may be one page, at the most two, that's devoted to the Kabbalah, which is the mystical non-dual tradition of Judaism. So you see what I'm saying? And the same is true in Christianity and Islam. You take a chapter on Islam, they'll have 40 pages on traditional Islam and the 5 things you do to be a good member of that tradition. And then they have maybe 1 page on Sufism, the mystical tradition of Islam. You see what I'm saying? So I was complaining. And then you soon said to me, stop complaining and write a book. And then I said, then I had asked the question, well, maybe somebody else has already written a book that's devoted to the non-dual traditions, where you have 48 pages on the non-dual and 2 pages on the mainstream, okay, and 48 pages on the mystical. Well, I cannot find any book anywhere that such book. I don't believe. So perhaps my book is the first non-dual textbook, even though it's half other subjects. I considered it very important to have a good introduction. The first part 1 is about 50 pages. And part 2, if you notice, there are 5 pages that are devoted to defining terms. We are so casual and careless about using the word God, spirit, soul, brain, mind, and consciousness. And what do these words mean in society? How do people use these words dualistically and non-dualistically? So I took it upon myself to try to summarize these various uses of the word. People especially have a hard time with spirit and soul and mixing them up, but that's a whole other topic we might talk about some other day. And in the last half the book is 8. I summarize 8 non-dual traditions. Judaism has Kabbalah. Christianity has its mystics, such as Meister Eckhart, Teresa Avila, etc. And Islam has the Sufis. Then we have Hinduism and Vedanta. We have Buddhism and Mahayana and Nagarjuna and Zen. And then we have the philosophical Taoism. Religious Taoism is dualistic, but philosophical Taoism is non-dual. Okay. And then there's the wonderful summary and view of the philosophy of George of Sawa, who's the founder of macrobiotics, which everybody thinks is a diet, but he's a non-dualist. And then in a very abstract way, the ultimate teachings of theosophy, I personally interpret as non-dual. That's a whole other rabbit hole we better not go into right now because of time limitations. And so I hope it's a contribution, and I do hope that some aspiring or professor, young professor, or who might take up the challenge and improve my book and add other non-dual traditions to it and elaborate on it even in a more complete way, and to add a serious discussion of Western non-dual philosophers such as Kant Plato, Schopenhauer, etc. I think that would be a real contribution. So I offer my book as a first step, and take it.
And I really thank you for doing
I'm
that.
not sure I answered your question.
But you have answered. What I understood is the traditional religious books, the ratio of dualism were more, and non-dualistic ratio was very, very less.
Right.
So you found that as a space to share your understanding and give some attention to the ratio which was less. And thank you for doing that, because this needs an attention. This part needs an attention. And thanks for doing that. Compare duality and non-duality philosophically and spiritually.
Okay. Well, I covered some of the aspects, but I'll try to pull it together. And I'm cheating 100% because I'm using a dualistic language. Philosophically, duality means more than one. Multiplicity, relationships. So I call it the relative reality. It's not a put down, it's a technical description of the fact there are relationships relative. Nothing is relative without more than one. And it is known, it is the world we experience. It is temporary, it is always changing. There is nothing even that is ongoing. It's always in a state of flux. Okay. And so that is how and this is manifested in philosophical discussions. They talk about the duality of good and evil and what have you. We can also talk about it theologically, that I have an immortal soul separate from God. Okay, so that's my understanding of the relative reality and what I mean by it. Then I had to give a title to non-duality. I call it the absolute. In Indian Vedanta, they call it Brahman. In Kabbalah, they call it Ein.
Okay.
Not Ein Sof, that's the second stage, and Ein Sof Sur is the third. But okay, so they have these states but these are labels. Now, what do we mean by the absolute or Brahman? Well, the first thing is, and this is the conundrum, it is not knowable by the cognitive mind. We can only know it by direct experience, and that's based on faith in the reports we have had. And the other thing, we say it is not changing. That's a clever way of saying it's permanent, but that's against the rules. Give a positive attribute, so you get tricky, but it's an important point, and it's a substratum, and there is no creator God. There's this great mystery that first. I use the word emanation for emanated the world. In Hinduism, there's often the concept of Shiva Shakti doing the dance. And in the Japanese, Chinese tradition, they talk about the yin yang dance of creation. But these are all metaphors, which is the trickiest part about understanding non-duality. You have this great mystery. How come there's a relative world? And in Hinduism, they call it Maya. Why is this an emanation? This is the trickiest point. I try in each of my chapters to identify that point, and it's really a point of faith. Like in Kabbalah, the emanation is the tree of life, 10 Sephirot, and that Keter. Anyway, all of this is there. But it's and this now raises another point. You cannot know this by the cognitive mind. It's important to study and know things. Perhaps this discussion will help point people in that direction. But in the end, you have to go beyond the cognitive mind. I think Abraham Maslow tried to do this when he talked about transpersonal psychology. He was heading in that direction. He didn't go all the way. He unfortunately died at age 60, and that was very unfortunate. I think he would have continued. What about this direct experience? I want to clarify something about that. Many Christian and Jewish and Islamic prophets or saints experience the presence of God, but they experience God separate from themselves. Like Moses experienced the voice of God through the burning bush, or at the top of Mount Sinai where God spoke to him. Okay, that's revelation. It's a religious experience, but it's a dualistic religious experience of you are separate from the divine. On the other hand, there's the religious experience of what I call absorption or merging, where our higher self, our higher consciousness finally gets to the point where it merges with the absolute. In the Vedantic tradition, they speak of this metaphorically, that our true nature, the higher self, the Atman, merges with the absolute Brahman. And the highest teaching is Brahman equals Atman. They are the same. Now we're getting into some deeper theology. Maybe someday we'll have a talk just about Vedanta, but open that up. But I hope, and so there are two types of experience: God separate from you, or the absolute concept. You have a merging experience. It raises a very difficult experience question. If there's no you in that experience, see, this is the how can you report it? But that's another discussion in my book, and I try to lay that out.
Yeah, I think you have tried to elaborate the most delicate part of this consciousness, because it's very tricky. And thanks for all this sincere effort you have made for people like me and others who are interested in this field. Thank you for doing that. What is the main challenge for a person to grasp a non-dual understanding?
The main challenge is, because we're all trained to, or many of us trained to study hard, learn to use your mind, go to university, get smarter, figure things out, right? But the main challenge is to accept the fact you cannot know the absolute through the cognitive mind. You have to transcend that, either through meditation, through karma yoga, jnana yoga, raja yoga, whatever path you choose, Kabbalah. And remember, and there's a beautiful thing in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, where how he defines yoga. Chitta, vritti, nirodha. Chitta is our mind stuff. Vritti, our thoughts. Nirodha, slow down. Basically, let's take the last two words, because chitta is a whole discussion. Your thoughts, and it's the slowing down of the mind. And to try to have no thoughts. Now, their practitioners say it's impossible not to have a thought, just let it go. But that's another discussion on types of meditation. And so how do we slow down this monkey mind Suzuki talked about that's always jumping from one thought to another? And I fail miserably on that. That's why I realized karma yoga is a better path for me. My biggest spiritual work is to get out of my head, so to speak, because I have such a curiosity, and I have to get detached from my curiosity. And so did I answer your question? I kind of got lost in my answer.
You're going towards that, because it's about the three terms in yoga you were mentioning, of which the last two words you were emphasizing.
Yeah, the chitta is the mind stuff. Metaphorically, think of it as a lump of clay, and every time you have a thought, you make a little mark in this soft clay.
Mm.
When you get that chitta completely smooth, you have the experience of absolute
Ah,
merging and absorption.
beautiful,
Okay.
beautiful. This
Okay.
metaphorically, um, it gives a picture to
Right.
understand,
Right.
not through
And
words, but a kind of a little dip into that experience of wanted to see the clay without a mark. Thank you.
that's right. That's right. Uh, I could go on a little bit. The Patanjali, his last step is sadhukapi samadhi, where there's a trace of ego that there's a little bit of mark on that chip. Swami Vivekananda came along and added another step, nirvana samadhi, where it's perfectly smooth. That's the main
Mhm.
difference between the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and Vivekananda's addition to him, making it Raja Yoga.
Mm, yeah,
And
yeah. I think
the,
I think
there's always sensation in these experiences, or would be dead. But the highest state is when there's sensation without any perception or thoughts.
mm, oh, that's a beautiful way to add sensation without any perception. Yeah, because that relates to the psychological aspect also. Yeah,
Right. But every
yeah.
perception is a judgment.
Mm, 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 mm. Yeah, and we also project our perception onto sensation, and then the sensation gets a different meaning, and then there is a struggle. So
Yeah,
it's not projecting anything to the sensation, but able to experience the sensation for what they are.
exactly. Yeah. And I think I'm sure I've run into this. I mean, uh, sometimes people in psychology get a little careless about sensation and perception. They're not the
Yeah,
same. To me, sensations are changes in the environment
yeah,
that your brain is picking up, and then perception is the evaluation.
yes, yes. I do agree with your way of looking at it. It resonates for me also.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one addition which came to my mind is about Ramana Maharishi, who's Indian.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So he said the question, who am I? Is like in the crematorium, we burn the body. So we use one stick with the flame. And after you lit the flame, then you have to put that um, stick also, not to hold on to that.
Exactly. Ramana Maharshi is one of my great heroes. For viewers, he died about 1950 or so. I've been to his ashram 30 years after his death a couple of times in South India, and he was the greatest Jnana Yoga. Who
Yeah,
am I?
yeah,
Neti Neti. I mean, it was just a magnificent
yeah,
spiritual teacher.
yeah. Thank you for sharing this experience, Alex. Does every religion have a dual and non-dual side to it? Please explain.
Okay, I guess I'll explain by example. Let us start with the Abrahamic traditions. The first earliest one is Judaism. And Judaism has a mystical tradition called Kabbalah. And even within Kabbalah is the concept of reincarnation, Gula. And um, until I would say the last 20 or 30 years, prior to that, many Jew, Jews thought the Kabbalah was a little bit weird and thought Kabbalists were strange and not really, um, shall I say, fully accepted. I'm sure there are exceptions to that. Uh, but in the last 30 years or so, Kabbalah has been reinstated, so to speak, as a part of Judaism that is to be respected. And so I think, and then there's Christian mysticism, uh, where some of the mystical experiences, I'll give one example. One of the great mystical uh, bishops and monks of the Catholic tradition was Meister Eckhart, who lived about 1,000 years ago. And he spoke of the Godhead, which to me I equate equate with the absolute or Brahman.
Mm.
And he also spoke of the soul and the merging. And of course, this could be interpreted as heresy. And when toward the end of his life, the Inquisition put him on trial and convicted him of heresy, and he had appealed to the Pope in the Vatican to have that changed. And if not, they might have burned him at the stake. But in a way, he was lucky. He died a natural death while waiting for the appeal to be processed. But so you talk about a conflict here. It was one of the great saints and scholars of the church in deep trouble. And Saint Teresa de Avila, who described the 7 levels of heaven in her meditations, and the 7th would be mystical, etc. But she was into the revelation aspect, not the merging, as was Saint John of the Cross, her cohort at the time, and she was also had some tentative Inquisition meetings and was suspect a little bit, but they never convicted her of anything, as far as I know. But you're right that it causes trouble, and and in the Sufi tradition, some mainstream Islamic groups, I believe it's correct to say, like the Wahhabis, would be very suspect of anybody who's a Sufi and not considered a true Muslim. And so what can I say? I don't know how we can go on more and more in this vein. What happens is what I call mainstream religions, the dualistic traditional viewpoints, things, they become more than spiritual traditions. They're economic and political institutions also. And when you rock the boat, so to speak, that challenges the standard line in any way, you're going to provoke some trouble, perhaps. And now, I'm just thinking now about how Buddhism started out with the Theravadic, and then after a few hundred years became, there was a dispute whether or not Buddha, see, the Theravadins only accepted what Buddha taught in public. Everybody heard it. Then a couple hundred years later, there were individuals in Buddhism who said Buddha also taught to the certain, I would call the elite, and these are teachings that were not in public. These are add-ons. Well, this is kind of tricky because how much do you add on? I suspect he did some of it, I would guess, but a lot of stuff was added on that caused the division into the 2 major branches of Buddhism. But I don't think, I cannot recall ever reading in my studies, perhaps it's I missed it, but any violence or any trials and that type of thing. The Buddhists, their separation seemed to be more on the peaceful side, that way. And then, of course, in Taoism, Lao Tzu's famous teachings of the Tao, which I consider the absolute ground, if you get into the beautiful book. But then religious Taoism, pretty soon people started wanting an altar and a god to worship. So you have this contradiction within Taoism of religious Taoism, temples, incense, and it's all very beautiful. We have it in San Francisco, wonderful Taoist temple. But then you have the philosophical, which is more aligned with the non-dual Vedantic or Nagarjuna line.
Yeah, because I remember, the sentence of one of the Tao poem is about Tao does not have a name, and once you give a name, then it's no more Tao. So it's like,
Right. That's what I said. You see,
yeah.
in the dualism, you can give attributes. Non-dual, it's no, no.
And so, what I also understand, um, Alex, is about when every religion is holding on to the dualistic part, when they also go beyond and embrace the non-dual part of it, then the ability to include various diversity becomes a possibility.
Yes, that's right. And I think there's been progress. I think people have to, I think it's wonderful if people are aware of these alternatives and their heart will respond to the path for them, because both paths are wonderful. Whatever enables you to raise your consciousness. And like I had one friend said, well, we got to accept the Maya and the dual. It's the only place we can do our work. And I said, you're right. Be a very devout dualist. And Ramana Krishna, one of the great gurus within the Vedanta tradition, he said, all religions are true, and you will develop. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Barry Johnson, one of the person who worked on polarities, so he mentioned about and. So what I understand from you is about duality and non-duality are not either or. It is and. Yeah, I can have the experience
Oh,
of duality.
oh. Listen, this is no put down on the dualistic mainstream
Yeah,
traditions in any way.
yeah.
They are equally important to human beings as the mystical. We have to respond we will respond at the level of which we are developed.
Yeah.
And and within the dual and within the non-dual traditions, there are different choices. And we have to keep both our mind and our heart open in order to go to the one that's correct. And it and 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 the great challenge is not to assume that what you've picked is the absolute truth and everybody should have it, and that would end up making you a fanatic. You don't got to watch that. I know the truth. Oh dear.
For me, one of the statement of, I want to clarify this because we are talking about non-dual part, is when Jesus said, judge ye not, for ye shall be judged. So when the judgment starts, I think the dualism starts. And when he says judge ye not, is it a dualistic position also? The statement carries the non-dualistic position.
Yeah, there are many statements in the Bible that can be interpreted non-dualistically. I and the Father are one.
Okay.
That this to me is the most important thing.
The merging happens. Okay.
I and the Father. I think that's the most powerful of all the statements. And understand this, that, and then of course, at the Council of Nicaea in 323, Nicaea is about 2 hours drive from Istanbul. In 323, Emperor Constantine called a council, and he wanted the Christians to come down and formalize a dogma. And the biggest question at the time was Jesus created by God, or was he the Son of God? There were about 300 or 400 bishops at this conference. They had such a disagreement. They voted that he was the Son of God. This is 300 years after he died. This is the most important decision made in the Christian tradition. It was at this council. And half the bishops were excommunicated. They went off on their own and formed other sects. It's a very interesting story. But this is when it was decided dogmatically. But now Paul spoke of this at the time of Jesus, but formally. And then these are the church councils, which I summarize in my book briefly. And they went on for several hundred years. And the Protestant tradition accepts, I think, the first 8. The Catholics still are having them. But you see, how you interpret the Bible, and then which Bible. People say, "I read the Bible says this," and I know they only speak English. Yet I said, "Do you know the ancient Greek?" Which, yeah, but that's nitpicking because this is not the territory of science. It's the territory of the heart and faith, and it's absurd to get into these kinds of arguments. And people say, my sacred scripture is the truth, the Bible, the Quran, or the Vedas are in error, and this and that. This is ego talking. The reality is, most people follow a tradition that they were born in or exposed to, and they're all fine. They're just different paths to the same place. I'm in Berkeley. I want to go to Chicago. I can take the bus. I can drive. God forbid, I could walk. I could fly. You know, and if you look at religion as these alternative paths to the same goal, we want to understand ourselves. We want to know what brought about this universe. What is the true purpose of our life? How should we live our life? And is there consciousness after death? And what are the implications of that with respect to how we treat each other and relate to each other during this lifetime? And I think the highest point in the spiritual development is my ability, or your ability, to love unconditionally. It's so hard to do that. I see spiritual development as like we have in the batting average in American baseball. You know, if you get a hit every time, you're batting 1,000. If you get a hit 30% of the time, you're batting 300. If you do that, they pay you $10 million a year. Well, I figured I started out at 20. I'm maybe at 150 now. A long ways to go to 1,000, but that's the path, and it's okay. I mean, I still experience anger, and I get judgmental, and then I think, oh, why did I do that? I got to work on that, you know, because I feel when I have those emotions, I don't understand something, and I have to process it. And and a lot of people get very hard on themselves that they're not perfect right away. Oh my goodness. And I think Jesus in the Bible did a very thing. You know, people wanted to stone a woman to death for adultery. And he said, okay, that's what the book says, the law. There are 613 laws in the Old Testament. But the person who throws the first rock you can only throw the first rock if you've never committed a sin yourself. Oh, pretty soon the whole crowd disappeared.
Yeah.
You see.
Yes.
Because everybody's batting average was less than 1,000 in that group. There wasn't one person in there that felt they had batted 1,000 and could throw that first rock.
Yeah. I think my understanding of your invitation into the non-dual space is we are more introduced to the traditional religious ideas, and there is a choice now expanded in the non-dual side. And if we also involve ourselves in that direction, then there is a holistic development of self and beyond self, and how this interaction can happen.
Right, absolutely. And to develop a healthy ego and to get rid of egocentrism and solve our everyday human problems is a very important step, because as long as we have relative world, family, worldly, business problems, they activate the mind. And if the state of yoga or union requires getting those vriddis down that smooth clay, we have to work on our everyday psychological stuff and reduce as long as we're experiencing anxiety, we're having an active mind. And it's very hard to live a life without some sort of anxiety. And so it's very important to do this psychological work. That's why I consider it the same path. And once that gets relatively under control, they'll always add to it the idea, keep your eye on something, the great mystery.
Yeah. I think I remember talking to a person called Peter Hawkins. He's an organizational coach, and he belongs to a Sufi tradition, and he was telling about Allah is the only God. Is actually there is no God but only God. Like everything is God. But somehow it got misinterpreted as Allah is only God. And then there became a struggle to now deny other possibilities. So this was one of his conversation I had with him.
Yeah, I mean, the what is the non-dual reality? We don't know. We have to have the experience. But if you have a creator God, then you have to ask, where did God come from? I mean, you get crazy. Yeah, I mean, it becomes an infinite regression. So we have to, so to understand these things, we have to go beyond cause and effect thinking, which is the basis of karma, which binds us here. And causality. I've been watching several teaching company courses on science and this and that, and they're really struggling. It's very interesting in the scientific point of view, trying to understand these different types of dimensions. What is time? What is space? What is causality? These are really big open questions in science to this day. And the arrogance or ignorance, I should say, of someone saying this is the answer for sure, this and that, it's very difficult to accept.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then it's a challenge for us not to make that person bad or to dislike them and to judge them, but to still love them.
Yep.
That's the big.
Yeah, I think, as you said, everything leads to that unconditional love, and that's the benefit of embracing this part of the non-dual and dual together also. Thank you. Why does there have to be a capital G while mentioning God?
Oh, this makes me think of Aristotle, how he went to great lengths to categorize and label all the different aspects of nature and standardize terminology. And that's what this is all about. We use the word God, capital G, then we have the word gods, small g, and goddesses, small g, etc. And then in the non-dual, no God, that whole thing. So I think it's very useful to have we all agree that when you use the word, when you speak of a monotheistic one God, Allah, or God the Father in the Christian tradition, that we'll use a capital G. So if you see God spelled with a capital G, we're talking about a monotheistic God. It's completely arbitrary. Now in paganism, like in the ancient tradition of Zeus and all his consorts of the Romans who took it over with Jupiter and Demeter and etc. When we're referencing the multiple gods, polytheism instead of monotheism, we just agree we use a small g.
Okay.
It's completely arbitrary.
Okay.
And so this discussion of capital G and small g is all within the dualistic context.
Okay.
In the non-dual, well, there are no creative gods. That's a very dualistic idea.
When we are struggling with the bigger G or smaller G, in the dualistic part, as you said, an impression which came to me is next to G, there is a O, which is a sunya. So I think
okay.
The circle is complete. So maybe we look at the O also, not necessarily the G alone. So I was just
okay.
Thinking,
okay.
It was a thought which came. I thought I will share it with you. You also have mentioned, when you talk about this comparative religion, your intention is to compare, but not judge, and inform, not advocate any particular religious perspective. Please clarify.
Well, I've alluded to this a little bit already, but I accept, for me, there is a great mystery. And religions deal with that great mystery. And that mystery at this point in time is not understandable or answerable by science. And it is also not answered 100% philosophically. Philosophers disagree. And religions postulate their beliefs in what the truth is. So I think the purpose of the book is to lay out all the different possible views of this great mystery and why it's important and our path to it and how it can make us better human beings and hopefully develop unconditional love, which is an aspiration that seems so remote given the condition of the world today. Uh, and uh, and to say this religion is better than that religion is, to me, the height of ignorance, because the reality is we don't know. And that's a fact. You can't even get a definition of God. We can give attributes to God if you want to believe in God as an entity, but nobody knows what the it is. And so I think the book can be a great contribution by being a guide and giving choice to people as which path to follow, and by making them aware of many different paths, perhaps making them more tolerant and helping develop the ability to love unconditionally and not to judge others.
Thank you for that. Because the struggle sometimes I go through is when I'm reading Hindu philosophies or Indian ideas, then there is a slight tendency to go towards being proud about it. And sometimes it can come across as, oh, this is better than that. So I was really curious to know, after reading so many religions, your ability to maintain a state inside of equanimity to all this is quite challenging. So what is that which you developed inside for you to
I'll give you something that helped me very much.
Thank you.
Think of all within Hinduism and all the other, there are different stages of development. It's not a question of who's better. There are different stages. Let me use George Osawa's 7 judgments or levels of consciousness. You might find somebody who's at level 1, another person at level 3. 7 is the absolute. And so one is not better than the other. You don't compare. You're not comparing apples and oranges. You're comparing apples with oranges. That's a mistake. There are different, everybody's at a different level in their development. One is not better than another. We're on the journey from San Francisco to Chicago using that metaphor. Some people are only gotten as far as Reno, Nevada, 200 miles from San Francisco. Some people are in Denver, 1,000 miles. One is not better than the other. We're all on this same journey. It's an illusion you have that one stage is better than the other. We're all going to go through all of the stages in order to get to that place. We want that place of understanding. And that's why we don't declare this is the path of that. Here are the paths. Where are you? Find the one that you respond to with your mind and heart.
Thank you. This makes things easy. And I think the struggle of which is good and bad is getting resolved in the process when we see it as a developmental journey. And thanks for giving that perspective.
Right. When the word good and bad comes up in religion, be careful.
Okay, that's a good wisdom to hold on. When the good and bad comes, be careful. Thank you. So again, this question is you have already answered in your book, but I would like to hear it from you and record it. It's like there is a student who asked you, what is the best religion? In the page 11, you have already mentioned about it, but I would like to record your answer because that answer you gave to the student was very, very significant for me.
Yes, told the students, the best religion for you is the one that makes you a more understanding, tolerant, and loving person. If your religion does that for you, that is the best religion for you.
I think that's a very simple and straightforward answer. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
And
By the way, uh, I had never, when I gave that answer, I had never had that question before in class. And here was this young woman, 18 or 20 years old, I can't remember, bright-eyed, looking at me, the father figure in the class. And I thought, oh my goodness. But then I realized the Lord helped me, and that was a spontaneous answer from me. It was not an intellectual answer. It just came out of me. And I have never changed my answer. That happened 30 years ago, maybe even longer. And I'm so glad that you felt good about that.
I felt good, and that's the answer applicable for many of this question about the religion. So, does it lead towards compassion? I think um, that's the evidence about. Again, as you said, is it a religious journey I'm making or an ego trip? Then it depends.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you for that. You state that the path of psychological growth and spiritual growth are two different stages of the same path. Please clarify.
The spiritual growth requires that, and for most people, we try to quiet our mind and be free of all our worldly concerns so we can focus on the mystery, so to speak. And like I pointed out, that the role of psychotherapy in helping us reduce our anxiety and resolve conflicts and what have you, and sort things out at the everyday practical aspects of life is a prerequisite to or our spiritual development or understanding or approaching the great mystery. And if we accept the idea that we need to have a quiet mind to do that, not be preoccupied, then obviously the early stages of development are psychological. Develop a healthy ego, kill the egocentric aspects, but not the healthy aspects, and move on the spiritual journey.
Okay. So I think this both goes in hand in some ways. Isn't it? That's what you're.
Oh, absolutely. They're very complementary. That's the key word.
Okay. Thank you, Alex, for that.
And, yeah. Okay.
You want to say something?
Well, I was thinking, I remember once you mentioned to me, what is sacred therapy?
The next question is on that. What is
Is that it? Okay, my memory is still in focus. Okay. Say, we have a choice to go on the journey alone, work on our psychological and spiritual stuff alone, or with our sangha or friends or therapists. Now, sacred therapy, by definition, means there's going to be somebody else there. Okay. And that person can be a therapist or a guru, or you have company. But the main point is that we focused on the change in identity with the in and of the world to in and not of the world. And it focuses on that transition to help you identify with the mystery.
Okay.
And that's versus focusing on personal problems, a divorce or juvenile delinquent children and what have you.
So what I understood from the sacred therapy is it doesn't mean that the person who's leading the therapy is a person who has attained or enlightened or whatever.
Oh, no, not necessarily.
Yeah. So it giving a space for the non-dual aspects, also the requirements of ego. So it's a kind of an integration of both.
Yeah.
And,
Oh, yeah.
and
If
also,
you're lucky enough to have an enlightened being helping you, that would be wonderful. But a spiritually oriented guru or therapist who may not have experienced the merging is still fine.
Fine. Because for me also is when people say I had a great experience or a spiritual experience, and then they hold on to that experience, and I feel that's also a struggle, because an experience has come, it's good, it's also past now, so it's
You
like,
said it, they hold on, there's an
yeah,
attachment.
yes, yes.
They're gonna stay stuck right there. You
Yeah,
gotta let go.
yeah.
See, I like to use this example.
Mhm.
Enjoy everything, enjoy your lollipops, but don't grasp it. That
Ah,
causes friction. If you
yeah,
grab it,
yes.
always be loose.
That's a good metaphor also. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Because
think Carl Jung helped us a lot when he said all of these matters have to be dealt
yes,
with
yes,
metaphorically, and he used the archetypes for that as a vehicle.
yes. I think he was able to introduce to the unknown and the larger aspects of influence on a personality.
Absolutely.
And um, what do we do with the atheist who says there is no God to the believers of God, and vice versa?
I love that question. I think the first step is to ask the atheist, what is this he doesn't believe in? Would he define what he means by God he doesn't believe in? And then I would put the same question to the theist who says they believe in God.
Mm, mm,
I think they both will fail to answer the question, because they'll say God, the theist will say God is powerful, wonderful, love. And then when you say, what is it that has these attributes, they're going to be lost.
mm,
So then I would say, well, perhaps you're both right.
mm.
From a theoretically, it's a possibility.
Mm,
But let's not leave out our friend the agnostic.
mm,
He's a very patient fellow, sitting on the fence, waiting for more information to come in. Let's work on psychological and spiritual growth that might answer this question in a real way instead of just an argument, because neither side is going to be able to convince the other of their
mm.
position, and it's a waste of time.
I think
But
this
the
is,
one thing I found that really helps, especially with respect to the atheists, do you agree that there is a great mystery that nobody, science, philosophy, or religion has answered, how this big movie came about called the universe?
mm,
I mean, you really think about it, the awe, I think awe, being in a state of awe, is a very important part of our development. When
mm,
I, this way or that way, or my faith gets shaken in any way, I just think, yes, I'm here on the planet. I look at the sky, I see the pictures, and they tell me this trillions of planets expanding. And is there such a thing as a beginning? I mean, it's so incredible. It's so beyond. We get so caught up in our technology and our cleverness in surviving on the planet, and also destroying it at the same time. And there really is no answer at this moment.
and I think
And
you give a very,
and
very
to take out, I beg your pardon. And I was going to say, and to take an absolute position that I know there is this or that is absurd.
yeah. What was inspiring for me is also was, instead of defending whether there is God exists or not, if we can get into an inquiry position about what do they mean by that, or how do they define there is God or no God, I
Yeah,
think that becomes much much more human experience, and I think
yeah.
that
They gotta make sure they're on the same page and not talking over each other.
yeah, I think that's so beautiful. So that gave me a perspective about not to get into defending, but to move into an inquiry.
I had interesting experience a couple of years ago talking to somebody who was very fundamentalist. It takes the Christian Bible, or the whole Bible, the Jewish part, the Old Testament, literally. And I told him, he said, "You believe in the Bible?" I said, "I think the Bible is beautiful metaphorically. I have no trouble listening to this, reading the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes of Jesus and those beautiful teachings. But I don't take things in the Bible literally," which he does. I said, "I can't." And so you and I are on the same page part of the time and not all the time.
Yeah.
Because I think the scriptures of the world are great metaphors.
Because once I was with a friend and he was an atheist, and he said, when I went to the temple, he said, "I won't come with you." I said, "If for you there is no God, then what's the problem in coming into the temple? Because anyway, God is not going to be there for you. And and if I believe there is God, and I don't have to search only in the temple, maybe he's available outside also. So it's like we don't have to make a difficulty out of it."
Yeah. Again, think of the stages. Some people are at the stage they can't enter a holy place.
Okay. So that can be seen as a stage. That's interesting.
No, they're just not open. No matter where I go, I think it's wonderful. If I go to India, go to the temples, and if and if I'm in, I remember when I was in Paris one time, I found it was delightful to go to this one beautiful church, the Sacré-Cœur, in Paris. It's a very special one,
Yes.
and it didn't matter to me. I go to the Vedanta temple. For me, I like the vibrations, not
Yeah.
the belief systems, but the feeling.
Yeah.
It touches my heart,
Yeah.
and this is all very personal.
Yes, I do agree with you on this. So, having mentioned about India, and you have come more than 15 times, so how this country, our country, impact you?
In many ways. I felt very much at home in India right from the start. And people say to me, "Oh, how could you go to India? There's so much poverty and this and that." This is many years ago, and still there today, but things are better that way. I'm talking about 1984. I took my first trip. And I got there and I felt at home. It was a very strange experience. I felt very much at home, and culturally and the behavior and everything. And then I spent the initial days at the Theosophical Society at Adyar, just outside Chennai or Madras at the time, and then went to Rishikesh area and spent a lot of time with Prem Varni and other yogis in that area, as you know, is a very special holy part of the Ganges River. And just being imbued in that atmosphere of reverence for the mystery and the spirituality and attitude of most of the people I met was spiritually life-giving. I felt good about it. And then I remember spending several weeks in the ashram, and my only duties were you sort the beans out, make sure there are no rocks in them, doing simple things like that. And it really slowed down my mind because I tend to be a type A active person. And the Buddha put it very well. He says, "Have faith in the Dharma, the teachers, have faith in me, and have faith in your Sangha, your spiritual fellow travelers." And that's very important. And I'm very appreciative that I have friends that are spiritually oriented, philosophically oriented, and scientifically oriented. Keeps me open to all of these dimensions because all of that feeds and helps my own development.
Yeah.
And India was a significant thing. And as after going there so many times, I figure I spent about 2 or 3 years of my life in India with all those individual trips. I felt a sense at home. I can talk about India, and I remember doing a pilgrimage to the source of the Ganges, and I'm blocking on the name now. Anyway, the last town on the road, and then you walk 3 miles to the Gamuk Glacier, the source of the Ganges.
Kedarinath and Badrinath you're talking about?
As I've been to Badrinath, we drove to that. In Kedarnath, I didn't go to. What's the other one?
Kailash.
Anyway,
Kailash.
pardon me?
Mount Kailash?
No. I got a block. Anyway, the XYZ.
Okay.
And that's where you go to the end of the road, and then you walk up to, and it was really, and then I was with a spiritual American friend of mine, and we wrote down all the things we needed to discard in our life, and we wrote it down, and then we put a match to them and put them in the river. The beginning of the glacier flow. It was just a stream at that time. And it was a wonderful thing. We spent overnight at the rest house there, which was ice cold. and then we came back. That's a wonderful way to spiritually visit India. You go to that place first and then follow the river all the way through Rishikesh and go to Varanasi and then down to Calcutta. Just that would be quite a journey. I have no interest in the big city activities in India. They're just like the other big cities, crowded, traffic, pollution. I head out of town as soon as possible.
That's interesting. I would like to state one of the Osho's statement about India and take your comments on that. Osho, Rajnish.
Osho.
So he made a statement about India, and I would like to state that and take your impressions on that. He said, India is a spiritual womb, and the development can happen in China and flowering in Japan in one side, like Zen happened. And similarly, the development can also happen from India to UK because that's giving stability, and flowering happens in America. So he said, India is like a spiritual womb. What is your impression on that, Alex?
I think, proportionally speaking, he has a point. He has a point. It's a unique kind of spirituality that permeates. And I think, I'm guessing, I have no data. I just have the impression that the percentage of people in India who accept the mystery or God or what have you in a real way, not in just a membership way, is probably higher than in many other countries, not all other countries. I have no data on this. I mean, this is a sort of like a statistical sociology question, but I have that impression. And of course, a cynic might say, well, that's because there's been so much poverty, people just had to turn to something else. You get into all that kind of discussion. And I have great respect for Osho's intellectual teachings and writings. I remember once I went to the Almora area with a friend of mine, and we took with us his recordings of the teachings of Atisha, the great Buddhist teacher, and who taught about the mind. And for 2 or 3 weeks, we played his recordings and his lectures on that, and they were just beautiful. I was very sorry that so many political and psychological problems developed and his organization fell apart and some very bad people took it over. And he got it. But I have great respect for Osho as an intellectual. He was a professor. He was very smart. He really knew comparative religion and things. And it made me very sad. I spent one day on a trip back from Yellowstone Park. We stopped at his ranch in Northern California, or Oregon rather. And it was too perfect, and I felt a little uncomfortable there. And I remember when he drove down in his car very slowly, and a person was walking behind the car with an automatic weapon because they were worried somebody, and I could see this is very sad. This is
Yeah.
to have that feel that's necessary. Something bad's going to happen. And within a few months, the whole thing fell apart. And it made me sad because his work, his intellectual and spiritual teachings, in many ways were, I thought, very, very much on target.
Mm.
And so I have this conflict about Osho.
Mm. Okay, thank you for saying that. I quoted it because he mentioned something about India as a womb for spirituality. I contain.
Yeah, I drifted away from that. I think he has a very strong point.
Okay. So I think we have done our work, and it was a great experience for me to relate with you. It's not just asking questions. For me, it was like relating with you and experiencing your wisdom and my little knowledge about non-dualism. And I don't have words now because, again, words are interfering to tell what I want to say. So a great thanks for.
And I want to thank you for honoring me and having this interview. And I enjoyed it very much. And I'm so glad we became friends years ago at Chennai. And I hope we maintain this. Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.